Good morning, Glenn will be my guide today. We will visit some interesting place on London, and Glenn will explain us everything about the places. Hi Glenn, good morning.
Everybody. Right, let's start with some basic information first of all then, about where we are. So London is a big old city.
How big?
It's 610 square miles, or for those in metric, 1,580 square kilometres. That is what we are talking
big
about.
Big enough.
That is what we are talking about.
Yes.
And it's divided up into 33 districts.
Okay.
Or to be pedantic, 27 London boroughs.
Okay.
4 so-called royal boroughs. So-called royal boroughs because they have a palace in them or have had a palace in the past. And there are 2 cities. The 2 cities are, slap bang in the middle, is the City of London. Now my technology doesn't work.
No problem.
I want it to work. Slap bang in the middle, the City of London.
Yes.
Approximately 2 square kilometres or 1 square mile. In fact, we call it the square mile. And the other city is the City of Westminster.
Okay.
That's the City of London where it all began 2,000 years ago. The Romans came here and they established a trading port known as Londinium, which probably looked something like that. They built a wall around the city around about 200 AD. They built a bridge across the River Thames around about 120 AD, and that was London, this walled city, for the next 1,000 years or so. Then about 1,000 years ago, a king called Edward builds a church and a palace to the west of the city walls, around a bend in the river, off of this picture. And the church and the palace probably looked something like this, he says, looking for his picture. Probably looked something like that around about middle of the 11th century. The palace still exists today. It doesn't look like that anymore, but also known as the Houses of Parliament, or Big Ben, is to give the building its proper name. And the church that Edward built, we now know as Westminster Abbey. It's changed over the years, but we'll go and have a look at that shortly. So the City of London, City of Westminster, the 2 main areas. And if we look at a modern day map of London, London A to Z, this is the modern day map of London, the big metropolis. If we zoom in on this, we've got, it says here, city, the city. If we zoom in on that, there's a road there called London Wall, which, surprise, 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 follows the line of the old Roman wall. Historically, everyone lived and worked within the city walls, but then as London grows and expands, people move out into the suburbs. So today, the City of London is the business district. We've got about, well, pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, about 400,000 people work there.
Whoa.
Only about 10,000 people live there. And then, I say, round a bend in the river to the west of the city walls, Edward the Confessor built his church and palace, which we now know the palace, also known as the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben, and the church is Westminster Abbey. So it's in the City of Westminster where you'll find the main church, the government, Buckingham Palace is nearby. Here we are staying at the Ritz Hotel on this map, which is just here on Piccadilly by Green Park. And then you've got 2 of the 4 main parks here, St James's Park, Green Park, Hyde Park, so a lot of green spaces. It's also in this area you're going to find many of the hotels, Covent Garden, and this area is the entertainment district. So if you like, we make our money in the City of London and then spend it in the City of Westminster.
Okay.
That's where we're going to spend most of our time today. We've got plenty of time today. Hopefully the traffic's not so bad. It's quite good this morning.
One of the reasons I choose Saturday because of the traffic, you know.
Yeah, I'll probably get a little bit busy later on, but ordinarily I live in the suburbs to the southeast, place called Erith, which is here. It's taken me, let's have a quick look, it's about 20-25 kilometres. Took me 50 minutes this morning with no traffic, but
Not
on
bad.
a weekday I have to budget for about 2 hours.
Wow.
Usually an hour and a half, hour
Crazy.
and 45 minutes. So hopefully we'll explore. So we'll try to we'll concentrate on the main areas. Tower of London, which is in the City of London. We'll drive past St Paul's Cathedral, which is another big church. They're the main sites in the city, the business district. Look at some of the modern architecture there, and then we'll have a look at Buckingham Palace, Parliament, tell you how all that works, and then we'll start off by driving around the parks and the museum area, and we'll go from there. And
Perfect.
excellent. Right, let's get going then.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the. I was many times in London, but only with business. I never visit like a tourist, you know, to have a professional guide and.
Right, there is Wi-Fi, but I'm not sure if
It's okay. It's okay.
if it's going to run out or not.
No problem.
Right.
I don't need.
Okay. So last thing at the Ritz Hotel,
Yes.
which opened in about 1906, so it's about 112 years old now.
Okay.
And I washed my car this morning. Now it's going to get dirty with this guy washing the road.
Always happen, you know. Murphy law. When you wash the car and it's raining, or somebody wash the road, you know.
I think it's just had new owners. The Ritz. It was owned by the Barclay brothers, who own a couple of newspapers. And I'm not quite sure.
Now it's some Qatar family who owned also Dorchester, I think. Yeah.
Qatar. Yeah, apparently the Qatarians own more land in London than the Queen now, apparently. So it is said.
They own also Harrods, I understand. They bought from Al Fayed
They did, yeah.
with
About 10 years ago now. Yeah.
1 point something billion pounds.
Yeah, he made a tidy profit out of that. We'll drive past Harrods shortly. Yeah, so the Ritz Hotel, famous for a couple of things. Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of the 1980s and early 1990s. This is where she passed away in 2013.
Whoa.
I'm not quite sure what she was doing here because she has a property just around the corner.
They showed me from the hotel on the left side, it was a private area who was living, there was live the Prime Minister, you know, they told me. And now they use for conference and for meetings and something. And it was apartment of Prime Minister there.
Yeah, I think she was friends with the Barclay brothers, but she had a property not far from here. I was also here in 1969, March 12, 1969, on my mother's 34th birthday, that Paul McCartney came here to celebrate his marriage to Linda Eastman.
In Ritz, yeah?
Yeah, so he got married in, well, if we get a chance, we'll go up there later on towards Abbey Road and where they got married, but they had the wedding reception here at the Ritz Hotel. And where's my mic? Sorry, where's the microphone? I put it.
I don't know where you put.
I think I might put it on the coat. Sorry. After all that.
No problem, because I have mine, and I think we are close one to each other. And
sorry everybody.
Okay, yeah.
I apologise. I thought I clipped it to my jacket, but I clipped it to my coat. Yeah, so Paul McCartney got married. So he didn't get married here, but he had his wedding reception here in. And welcome to London for the crazy drivers. Obviously very impatient. And the only other Beatle to turn up was George Harrison, who was late. George Harrison was late because the police had raided his house, and lo and behold, they found drugs in his house.
Whoa.
But George Harrison denied that the drugs that the police had found were not his drugs. He said, look, I'm a tidy person. I've got a sock drawer for my socks, I've got a hash box for my hash, and this hash, which the police have found, is not mine. So he was late, and the other person to turn up to the wedding reception was Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, who apparently was a big fan of the Beatles. So that's the Ritz Hotel. To my left is Green Park. We'll talk about Green Park a little bit more detail later on, but there are 5 major parks in central London. You go out to the suburbs, there are other larger parks, and Buckingham Palace, just catch a glimpse of Buckingham Palace through the trees to the left-hand side. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. This road is called Piccadilly. Strange name, Piccadilly. Piccadilly takes its name from a pickadill. What was a pickadill? A pickadill was a type of collar, very fashionable in the 16th century. And a man called Mr. Baker used to make pickadills. He became very, very wealthy and built himself a big old country house out in this area. And he named his big old house, when this was all countryside, he named his house Piccadilly Hall in honour of his pickadills. Hard Rock Cafe, slightly out to my right hand side, just over the wall. First Hard Rock Cafe in the world. A couple of Americans, Isaac T. Gray, Peter Morgan, a couple of Americans in London couldn't get themselves a decent burger in London in the late 60s, early 70s, so they decided to make their own.
Oh.
And they opened up the Hard Rock Cafe.
I was thinking the first one was in America, not here in London.
It was here, but it was a couple of Americans. And Eric Clapton was a regular at the Hard Rock Cafe, and he said, is there some way I can mark my favourite spot at the bar? And they said, yeah, sure, fine, how do you want to do it? He said, well, here's my guitar, hang my guitar up over my spot at the bar, and which they did. And then a few weeks later, the Hard Rock Cafe received a package, which was another guitar with a little note attached to it saying, mine's as good as his, love, Pete Townsend of The Who. So your first two items of rock and roll memorabilia in the 100+ Hard Rock Cafes and the 30+ countries in the world, Pete Townsend and Eric Clapton's guitars, which still hang over the bar. On my right hand side, the big archway we're looking at on my right hand side is known as the Constitution Arch or the Wellington Arch. This was built to commemorate the victories over the French during the Napoleonic Wars. French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, late 1700s, early 1800s, big ambition of conquering Europe, which he largely succeeded in doing. And I'm just going to go around this junction again to complete this story. He largely succeeded in doing. By 1812, Napoleon was defeated and sent into exile to the island of Elba. But then he escaped from exile in Elba, went back to France and Paris and raised his army again, which meant the Allies had to get back together again, and then the final showdown takes place between the Allies and Napoleon at a place called Waterloo, which is just south of Brussels. So June 1815, Battle of Waterloo. The British and the Allies, who were led by a man called Arthur Wellesley, who was given the title Duke of Wellington, the Allies were victorious over the French. So if you've ever been to Rome, the Romans used to build celebratory arches to commemorate their victories over their enemies. We copied that idea in the 19th century and built what is known as the Constitution Arch or the Wellington Arch. The Duke of Wellington used to live in the house to my right hand side, the honey-coloured stone building, which we'll catch a glimpse of again in a second. That was his house. In fact, his descendants still live there. Part of it is a museum you can visit. The equestrian figure, the guy on the horse, that is the Duke of Wellington coming into view at 3 o'clock to me. There is the Duke of Wellington himself, and his horse Copenhagen was buried with full military honours because he carried the great Duke, and during the Battle of Waterloo and these other campaigns, buried with full military honours. So called Apsley House is the home of the Dukes of Wellington, also known as Number 1 London. That's the prestigious address of Number 1 London, and I say his descendants still live there, and it's also a museum to visit. So we're coming into an area called Knightsbridge, and Knightsbridge is famous for its shopping. And a couple of famous stores along here, some familiar names, as you can tell by looking at me. I don't do shopping, I'm just I'm very basic. So a couple of stores along here. Harvey Nichols is the red brick building coming up on the left hand side with a nice blue flag and the sort of
famous
Renaissance.
shop.
Harvey Nichols, yeah, apparently it was Diana's favourite store, Princess Diana's favourite store, and there's a TV show called Absolutely Fabulous, comedy show from the late 90s, early noughties, which often gets mentioned, Harvey Nichols in that show. And then a couple of other hotels around here as well. On my
Mandarin Oriental.
The Mandarin Oriental Hotel, built as the Hyde Park Hotel, and all sorts of famous people stayed here.
Last time when I was here, it was Bruce Willis launching some new movie, something 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Okay.
After I was on the concert on Celine Dion on Hyde Park, and she was leaving here. Everybody from the Hyde Park came in here to begging her to come on the balcony and to say hello, you know.
Yeah, so Celine Dion stayed there, as you just told me. Winston Churchill, Mahatma Gandhi, and Britney Spears have also stayed there as well. So I had a bit of a fire a few years. I was going through refurbishment, then had a fire, then I had to close it again. But the other famous store along here is Harrods, with the green awnings and the sort of beigey colour stonework. This is Harrods, coming up to 200 years old. Harrods started life as a little convenience store in the East End of London. We talk about the East End, the West End. East and west of what? East and west of the old city. And the traditionally the eastern side is the poor area where the docks are. We'll take a trip over there later on. But Harrods started life. Charles Henry Harrod started his store around about 200 years ago in that part of London. And then when this area was being developed in the early 19th century, Mr. Harrod saw an opportunity here to cater for the new wealthy neighbourhood of this part of London. And so he built a store here, and the rest is history.
And the building was so big from the beginning?
It wasn't. That building is early 20th century, so the building has changed over the years.
Because it's huge, you know, for this time.
Indeed, yeah. And they boast they can sell anything at Harrods, from a pin to an elephant. And they did sell an elephant. They do have I'm not sure if they still have a pet section. And they did sell an elephant. It was the elephant was called Gertie. Gertie was purchased by King Zog, who was the exiled king of Albania. So King Zog buys Gertie the elephant and gives it as a present to Ronald Reagan. You couldn't make this stuff up, but it's true. So you're now going to ask me what happened to Gertie the elephant. Ended up in Sacramento Zoo. So it's changed hands a few times. The present owners of the royal family of Qatar, however you want to pronounce it, and previous owner was Mohammed Al Fayed, who of course was famous for a lot of things, including being the father of Dodi Al Fayed, who was killed in the car accident, which also fatally wounded Diana back in '97. Can you believe it? So there's a couple of churches on my right hand side, and this white stone church is known as the Brompton Oratory. This is a Catholic church, we'll do the story later on, but essentially in the 16th century, 1500s, Catholicism was effectively banned for the next 300 years. Then a time called the Reformation, but then there was a reconciliation with the Catholic Church in the early 19th century. We then start to see Catholic churches being built again and Catholics getting equal rights again. So the Brompton Oratory, the white stone church which just passed, was the first, if not the first, then one of the first Catholic churches to be built after the Reformation in the 19th century. This area of South Kensington is full of museums. The red brick building to my right hand side at 3 o'clock to me is the Victoria and Albert Museum, a museum dedicated to arts and crafts and design. If I turn right halfway up the street on the left is the Science Museum, which has fantastic things from the Apollo space program, some of the oldest steam locomotives known to mankind, and then the rather gorgeous pink and blue terracotta building to my right hand side is the Natural History Museum. The origins of the Natural History Museum go back to the late 1700s. It was part of the British Museum, the Natural History section of the British Museum, but that collection grew and grew and grew and grew, and so they decided to build a whole new museum for the Natural History collection. 1880s, a man called Alfred Waterhouse designed this rather beautiful Romanesque style museum. Look up between the dormer windows, you can see all the animals resting on their haunches, so it's a little bit of a clue as to what the building is. And so this area around here, so it's mostly the museum area, and like most natural history museums in the world, you've got the usual collection of dinosaurs and fossils. But unlike most natural history museums in the world, this one's free to go in, as are a lot of the museums and galleries in London. So yes, they accept donations, there's gift shops, things like that, where they can make some money. But a lot of the money to pay for this comes from central government and bequests. Now, most of this area of Kensington was developed in the around about 1830s, 1840s. And this was before the railways, before the motor car. How did you get around town all those years ago? Horse and carriage. And then at the end of the day, you had to put the horse and carriage somewhere. So where did you put them? You put them in the mews, M-E-W-S. What you're looking at left and right here is a typical mews. These were basically stables. And then the boys and girls that used to ride the horse and carriages would also sleep here as well. So they were basically coach houses or stables, and of course these days with people driving motor cars, don't drive horses and carts around the city anymore, although it's probably quicker to ride a horse in this city than driving in a car. They've been converted to very desirable residences, and they go in this area. Go for about £4 million. They are deceptive. Once you walk through the door, they're deceptively. They look small from the outside, but they're deceptively large on the inside. Some have converted and dug into the basement to create some extra space, but they are quite desirable. The large garage doors that you see, you can imagine historically this is where you put the horses and the carriage. Some of them, if we'll see another muse later on, let's see if we can look into one. Some still have a lot of space for cars. Some might be used for the utility space for washing machines, that sort of thing. But a lot of the buildings around here look like stone buildings. London is built on clay. From clay we make bricks, and the vast majority of buildings in London are built of brick. But some of these buildings here on my left-hand side, right-hand side, look like stone buildings. Well, they're actually brick buildings, but they've been plastered over with something called stucco. And then put this plaster up on the wall, the stucco up on the wall, put little grooves in the plaster, make it look like stone. Because back in the 19th century, under the rule of Queen Victoria, the Victorians, a bit pretentious, in this area they didn't want to live in a brick building. Oh, no, far too common. They want to live in a stone building. But they've cheated a little bit here by putting stucco on the buildings here. Going back to the Natural History Museum, which you can see at 2 o'clock to us, over the years they've extended it, and the last big extension was about 20 years ago when they built which will be on our right hand side, you can see the modern glass building at 1 o'clock to us. That's a bit of a behind the scenes look at the Natural History Museums. You can look through a window, see all the scientists doing their work. Most of them are on their computers looking at Facebook, but that's one of the little things you can do. The building on the corner on the left hand side used to be the international headquarters for the scouting movement. It just moved out about a year or so ago. Scouting movement started by a man called Baden-Powell, Robert Baden-Powell, in the early 20th century. Not sure what he's doing, but a lot of these buildings on my left hand side, they were built as residences. Over the years, a lot of them have been converted. So whereas one of these buildings was a whole house for a family, because back in the 19th century, average household size was going to be 10 children, plus your servants would have been living here as well. Hence the very large houses. But then as demographics have changed, household sizes become smaller, people move into the nice new developing suburbs, and so a lot of the larger properties that we see here in central London have subsequently been converted to smaller apartments. Another typical muse, just to give you some idea of the space that you can see, this one is like a little car hire place, but you can see they are quite deceptively large on the inside. But so there's a little car hire place on my left here. Let's see, a little office there, but mostly residents. Yeah, they are deceptive. Mews, M-E-W-S. Okay. So we are driving through the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. So I said you've got the 27 London boroughs, 2 cities, and Royal boroughs. If you want to know which district you're in, which borough you're in, if you look at the street sign, so for example on my right hand side you can see the street sign saying Peacham Mews. Typically on the street sign it will tell you which of the boroughs you are in. And so you can see there it says the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. I say so-called Royal Borough because, well, in the case of Kensington and Chelsea, we've got a palace here, which we'll catch a glimpse of in a second. And then you can also see in red writing SW7. SW7 is what we call the postal code, and in the United States call it the zip code. SW for southwest, so in the southwest part of London here. So, yeah, so most of this area would have been developed in the sort of about the mid-19th century, and we are going to take a little drive up towards Kensington Gardens and Kensington Palace. So we're going to catch only a small glimpse of Kensington Palace, we will see, but the quick history of it is that all this was countryside. and although this was mostly developed in the 19th century, there was a few little settlements out here. And the Earls of Nottingham is an area about 120 miles north of London. The Earls of Nottingham used to have a house in the countryside out here in the early 1600s. With a lot of the palaces like Windsor Castle and Westminster Palace, Tower of London, Greenwich Palace, they were all on the river. There was a palace called Whitehall Palace on the river, and in the late 1600s, the monarch at the time, King William III, and his wife Mary II, it wasn't a very suitable place to live because King William III, suffered terribly from asthma, and he needed somewhere away from the damp environment of the river. So what they did, they took over Nottingham House, and they commissioned a man called Christopher Wren to build a nice new palace for them. And through the trees on my right-hand side is the result of that, called Kensington Palace. So the first monarchs to move into Kensington Palace was King William III and Mary II in the late 1600s, early 1700s. Further work was carried out in the early 1700s by subsequent monarchs. But it was only used as a palace for monarchs from the late 1600s until 1760. The last monarch to live at Kensington Palace was King George II, who died in 1760 here at Kensington Palace while sitting on the toilet. And so although no monarchs have lived here for 250 years, it still is used as a royal residence, and the people that live here now include the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, that's William and Kate and their 3 children, plus the Queen's cousin, the Duke of Kent, also another one of the Queen's cousins, Duke of Gloucester. So there are private apartments here where members of the royal family live, and some of it is open to the public, what are called the state apartments. Some of the rooms are open to the public. There's an admission charge. There are other, in my opinion, there are better palaces to visit than Kensington Palace. But if you have an interest in the monarchs of the early 18th century or Queen Victoria, then you might want to visit Kensington Palace. Why I say Queen Victoria? Well, Queen Victoria was born at Kensington Palace and pretty much grew up there. She wouldn't have been going out night clubbing or anything like that back in those days. Would have met very few people in terms of socially, and certainly not men. But one of the men that she did meet was her first cousin Albert. I'll continue the story of Prince Albert in a second. But I'll quickly drive along here. There's some very attractive properties along here. A couple of embassies along here. But of note are various plaques on the wall to tell us who lived here. So, for example, number 28 on my right-hand side, the red brick building. Sir Winston Churchill, Prime Minister, lived and died here. This is where Winston Churchill, Prime Minister during the Second World War and again in the 1950s after the Second World War. This is where he lived and died back in January 1965. So just past the anniversary of his passing. Other plaques on the walls around here, which we'll discuss in a second as I manoeuvre this. Of course, these streets around here were never built to accommodate motor cars.
What is inside now? Where is the Churchill House? Is it a museum or?
It's a private residence.
Private residence?
Yeah. So other names on the walls here, my right hand side is Vanessa Bell, Virginia Woolf, writers. They lived here, and there's a better view of the plaque on the wall to Winston Churchill on my left hand side rather than trying to shoot across me.
Sir Winston Churchill, 1874, 1965, Prime Minister, lived and died here. I remember I saw some movie with Winston Churchill. I remember the door and the building. They do this in the same building. I think some shooting.
There's obviously lots of movies about Winston Churchill. The more recent one, Darkest Hour, that's with I've forgot his name. It'll come to me in a second, but that was a few years ago. We'll drive past the war rooms shortly. A lot of the war rooms will reproduce in a studio. We'll drive past that later on. Okay, so going back to Queen Victoria, so she was born at Kensington Palace, and so she pretty much grew up at Kensington Palace, and at the age of 18 she became monarch. And she, say, would have met not many people socially, but eventually introduced to her first cousin Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, and fell madly in love. She proposed to him. They got married at age 21, 9 kids and 40 plus grandchildren. Albert's motto was never relax, never relax, never relax. Not very good advice. He died at the age of 42 in 1862. And Queen Victoria went into mourning for the rest of her life. Next 40 years she's in mourning for the rest of her life. But when Albert passed away, countless memorials went up to Prince Albert, and the main Albert memorial is to your left hand side. This nice gold statue to your left hand side is the official Albert Memorial, which was unveiled in 1870. The basic design by a man called George Gilbert Scott, but every major sculptor of the mid-19th century contributed to it. There's lots of allegorical figures representing the continents and representing science and industry, but the basic design by a man called George Gilbert Scott. And a gilded bronze statue about 20 years ago. Poor old Albert was looking a bit green as the gilding was deteriorating, so that's re-gild him about 20 years ago. So that's called the Albert Memorial, and then ahead of us is the Royal Albert Hall, which has just celebrated its 150th birthday last year. Big old concert hall, and mostly classical music. As you can see at the moment, there's an advertisement for the Cirque du Soleil, who are here at the moment. They visit every year in January, and mostly classical music. There's a series of classical concerts called the Proms, short for Promenade Concerts. That's sponsored by the BBC. It usually runs from July through to September. In terms of contemporary music, Beatles have played here 3 times. First band I ever saw here was Phil Collins back in 19... And the last time I came here was a few weeks ago to see a band called Deacon Blue, so contemporary music too. They even have sporting events here. So they have a tennis tournament, which is mostly the veterans circuit. So people like, John McEnroe, Pete McNamara, they play a sort of tennis tournament every year. They've even had beach volleyball and sumo wrestling here.
Wrestling?
Sumo wrestling they've had here once.
Sumo wrestling.
So it's a gorgeous space. There's usually I haven't got the picture here, but there's usually a picture here of what it looks like inside. It's a gorgeous space inside. Alas, the acoustics are not brilliant. I mean, they've tried to improve the acoustics a couple of times in the 20th century. But there's a bit of an echo. One composer said it is the only place where a composer can be sure to hear his composition more than once, because the echo is that bad. It gets a mention, going back to the Beatles. The Beatles mentioned this place in a song called A Day in the Life. The lyric that is sung says, "I read the news today, oh boy, 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, and though the holes were rather small, they had to count them all. Now they know how many holes it takes to fill the Albert Hall." From a song called Day in the Life, which featured on an album called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And the album cover design for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was designed by a man called Peter Blake, who attended, to my right hand side, the Royal College of Art. And the Royal College of Art, other alumni of the Royal College of Art include the Scott brothers, Ridley Scott and Tony Scott, the film directors. They attended Royal College of Art. Dick Taylor, first bassist of the Rolling Stones, attended Royal College of Art. He left the Rolling Stones, replaced by Bill Wyman. So that's the Royal College of Art. And then here on my right hand side was the Royal College of Organists, with this gorgeous sort of frieze on the building. I mean, the Royal College of Organists still exists, but not here anymore. And then there are other educational establishments also here. Ahead of me is Imperial College Union. That's the student union, so it's like the bar and the social scene. It's to my left-hand side, and a lot of this area was developed in the mid 19th century. We're going to drive through Hyde Park shortly, but one thing that Prince Albert did was to it was the brainchild behind something called the Great Exhibition, which took place in Hyde Park in 1851. The Great Exhibition was a chance for Britain to show off how great Great Britain was. And so it was mostly, it was the Industrial Revolution, so lots of manufacturers from Britain. It wasn't just Britain, there were other things. There was all sorts of carpets from India and Persian carpets, the Kohinoor diamond, which we had acquired from India, which is now part of the Crown Jewels, that was on display. Samuel Colt was displaying his firearms, but it was housed in this giant, what could be best described as a greenhouse or hothouse in Hyde Park, and designed by a man called Paxton, and it was nicknamed the Crystal Palace. And the whole exhibition lasted about 6 months. The profits from this exhibition went to develop this area. We nicknamed this area Albertopolis. And as I say, Prince Albert was a big patron of arts, crafts and designs. The origins of the Victoria and Albert Museum was at this time, plus all the education establishments that we've seen here, so Royal College of Art, College of Organists, and Imperial College, called Imperial College in the early 20th century, but Imperial College was an amalgamation of a number of different educational establishments here, the Royal Chemistry College, the College of Mining, but today they're all amalgamated into Imperial College, which is mostly science and engineering. There is a business school here, but you tend to associate Imperial College, which occupies pretty much all the buildings on my right-hand side. It's mostly associated with science and engineering. Famous people that attended Imperial College include H.G. Wells, who became more famous for writing science fiction, and then a man called Brian May, who studied astrophysics here. He was interested in playing guitar. He put a little note on the notice board asking for a drummer, and a man called Roger Taylor, who eventually studied dentistry, joined Brian May. They formed a band called Smile, who eventually recruited a man called Frederick Balsara, and they formed a band called Queen. And Queen's first public performance was in the student bar here at Imperial College back in 1970, July 18th, July 1970. So this is where Queen were essentially formed at Imperial College. I've got to move on because this is where I usually get caught on camera for stopping in the bus stop. A nice view of the Royal Albert Hall is going to come up on your left hand side. Nice view of the Albert Hall there, so I can't really stop because I get there's cameras everywhere in London monitoring everything.
If something happens, send me the bill and I will cover, no problem.
And then on my right hand side is the Royal College of Music, not to be confused with the Royal Academy of Music. Royal College of Music, famous alumni of the Royal College of Music include Andrew Lloyd Webber, of course the composer who did Cats among other things, his brother Julian, who's an accomplished cellist, a man called Rick Wakeman, keyboardist, used to be in a band called Yes and did lots of early Bowie stuff, including the fantastic piano playing on Life on Mars. Catherine Jenkins, opera singer, she was at the Royal College of Music too. So that's the Royal Albert Hall again. There's usually posters outside saying who's appearing soon, plus the photograph inside, but as I say, at the moment it's the Cirque du Soleil. Okay, right, let's have a quick drive through the parks. One o'clock to us, red brick building with the nice tall chimney stacks. This is the Royal Geographical Society, and the statue on the corner at 1 o'clock to us is a man called Livingstone, explorer, philanthropist, A lot of, certainly during the 19th century, when we Brits were going around the world on fantastic expeditions and discovering new lands and subjugating them, a lot of those expeditions were coordinated from here, from the Royal Geographical Society. We're going to take a little drive through the parks here. You go back 250 years, all of this was all countryside and hunting grounds. Kings and queens would have been hunting deer and boar around this area. And then Hyde Park, well, it's actually, to be pedantic, two parks here. To my right hand side is Hyde Park, to my left hand side is Kensington Gardens. I say more than 250 years ago it was just all countryside, and then the parks developed about 250 years ago. Although they weren't open to the general public like they are today, it would only been the reserve of nobility among other people. But so we have two parks here, Kensington Gardens to my left. We talked about Kensington Palace and the Albert Memorial. There's a small gallery on my left hand side called the Serpentine Gallery, which used to charge, but now it's free to go in. And then we have also, on my right hand side is Hyde Park. I'll just quickly stop and show you this. It's about 600 acres. What's that, about 400 hectares, the two parks together. I forgot to mention that when Charles and Diana got married back in 1981, they lived at Kensington Palace, but they got divorced in the early 1990s. Prince Charles moved to St James's Palace, which we will see shortly, and Diana continued to live at Kensington Palace until she passed away in 97. And then countless memorials, several memorials have been built to Princess Diana, including the Diana Memorial Fountain. Let me try to park here. I don't know if you want to get out, have a look at the Diana Memorial Fountain. Hang on a second. Through the trees on my left hand side is this sort of circular water feature, which is known as the Diana Memorial Fountain, and it was unveiled, when was it, about 12 years ago now, that it was completed. In fact, there was a bit of controversy when it was completed, because of safety reasons. The whole idea of this little circuit, although they call it a fountain, it's not a fountain, it spurts water though. It's more of a water feature with water circulating around it. And you can take your shoes and socks off and go paddling in it in the summer or in the winter if you want. But when they first opened it, people were taking their shoes and socks off, slipping over, causing injuries. So they had to change it and put some anti-slip material on the ground. And then they reopened it, and then people were paddling and getting out of the water, but then dripping water on the grass, and people were then slipping over, causing injuries. So they had to close it again and create an anti-slip area around the fountain. And then late last year, in the grounds of Kensington Palace, a statue of Diana was unveiled by William and Harry. Harry came back to England for that unveiling last year. I don't know if you want to get out and look at it. You can see it from here, but let me know if you want to get out. I'll have to park the car. I can't really stop here. Did you want to get out, or?
No, it's fine. We're okay.
Okay, that's good. A million things to show you.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some horses at 12 o'clock to us, so you can do pretty much anything in Hyde Park. The people running around, there's usually like a, what they label up as British Army fitness regime. Probably their van here somewhere. There you go.
Nice horses.
And then you've got the horses here. So, well, I say horses have been here for centuries. I say it was hunting grounds years ago. And a little bit later on, we're going to see the horse guards. Their barracks and stables are behind us. Can't see them from here, but so I'm not suggesting that these people on the horses here are the soldiers from the horse guards, but there are some stables on the north side of the park, and in fact, the young lady is from the Hyde Park stables. So you can rent a horse, go horse riding through the park. I can't remember how much it is, about £40 an hour or something like that. So you can go horse riding, there's people cycling, jogging, as you can see. And they have sporting events here. When they had the Olympics in 2012, they had the triathlon here. There's lots of tributaries that run into the main river, the River Thames, and one of those tributaries is the Westbourne, and they did something with the Westbourne to create this lake that you see here. The lake is called the Serpentine, left and right of us, and you can see all the bird life. There are some boats not out today, but there's some, we can rent a boat, go boating on the lake. There's also a swimming area just over my right shoulder at about 4 o'clock to us. There's a small area for swimming where a bunch of nutters go for a traditional Christmas Day swim to compete for the Peter Pan Cup. Peter Pan was a story written by a man called J.M. Barrie. J.M. Barrie lived on the north side of the park, and mentioned in the story is Kensington Gardens. So there's a bunch of people that go for a traditional Christmas Day swim in the Serpentine. You have to be a member of the swimming club to compete, so you can't just turn up. You can turn up to watch if you really want to on Christmas Day. Yeah, that's it. And there, going back to Peter Pan, there is a statue. You can't see it from here, but about 200 metres to my left-hand side. Alas, you can't see it from here, but there is a statue to Peter Pan, which magically appeared overnight, and all the children were in awe of this statue. Can we drive along the North Carriage today? Oh, watch out, duck. Duck in the middle of the road. A lot of filming going on. We'll drive past Buckingham Palace later on, but there is a lot of movie production going on at the moment. These trailers to my right hand side look like
they was waiting on the pandemic time, and now because they released the measure, they start again to make movies.
Yeah, I mean there was some productions going on during the lockdown last year.
Even James Bond movie was waiting almost 2 years to to be finalized.
Yeah. I usually, as I say, I walked past Buckingham Palace the other day, and there was a bunch of trailers, and I did ask. Sometimes they tell you, sometimes they don't, which is fair enough. But I can imagine something like another Bridgerton. I know the new Downton Abbey movie is going to be out later this year. So Kensington Gardens, Hyde Park. Done that to death. There's a lot of concerts they have in Hyde Park as well in the summer. So the first big concert they had in Hyde Park was Pink Floyd in, I think it was 68. Then famously the Rolling Stones played for free in 1969, just after Brian Jones passed away, and the concert ended up as a bit of a memorial also to Brian Jones. Mick Jagger read poems by Shelley, wore a white dress, and they released lots of butterflies as a memorial to how rock and roll is that. There's a small fountain on my left-hand side through the in the park here. We've got a bit of a red light, which sort of helps. The fountain and park features in a movie called Bridget Jones's, the second Bridget Jones movie, Edge of Reason. Just here on my left-hand side, nice little garden there. There's also a memorial there to Edward Jenner, who, of course, developed a vaccine. I'm not quite sure why there's a memorial to Jenner there. They must have lived in this area somewhere. I haven't been able to confirm that. So if I'm not going to, all right, let's go this way. Yeah, let's show you this as well, since we're in this area. Traffic's good.
Perfect.
This area is called Paddington. Lots of churches in London. We'll do churches to death later on, but this little church here is where Oscar Wilde got married, the famous playwright.
It was a bear, a Paddington bear, no? Bear.
We will talk about Paddington, yep. So, yeah, Oscar Wilde, although he was homosexual, did get married to a lady called Constance Wright, and they had a couple of children. Oscar Wilde said of marriage, he said, bigamy is having one wife too many, and monogamy is the same. Yeah, so this area is called Paddington. Typical mid-19th century houses. Again, a lot of the houses around here have been converted to hotels, sort of mid-price hotels, little boutique, rather than chains of hotels. They're mostly little independent hotels around here. Paddington was built as a transport hub mostly, and I'm going to do a quick U-turn here. I can't turn right here, but Paddington Station is at 1 o'clock to me. So one of the main rail termini in London is Paddington Station at 1 o'clock, and built in the 1840s, the Great West Railway, built by an engineer, arguably the greatest civil engineer ever to live, a man called Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who built railways. He built bridges that took his railways, he built tunnels that took his railways, he also built ships. So he built the Great West Railway, which leaves from Paddington, heads due west out of London, through a place called Reading, through Swindon, to a place called Bristol. Bristol is a port town. So you would travel from London along Brunel's railway, through his tunnels, over his bridges, get off at Bristol, and then jump on a ship that he made called the Great Western, which would then take you to New York. So you could go from London to New York and everything this guy Brunel built. The guy was a genius. But it was also at Paddington Station where in the late 1960s the Brown family found a bear, and this bear had come from darkest Peru. All he had was a suitcase full of marmalade sandwiches, and a little note was attached to this bear which said, "Please look after this bear." And the Brown family, who lived nearby, took the bear home and called him Paddington. So created by a man called Michael Bond, who passed away about 5-6 years ago. He was writing Paddington stories right up until he passed away. He was about 92, he was about the same age as the Queen when he passed away.
I saw the movie with Paddington, very nice, very cute.
So the first story was called A Bear Called Paddington. It was about 1968, 69. And I mean, as a kid, I remember the small cartoon series in the early 1970s, and then the main Paddington, I think they filmed a third Paddington movie, was released about, what, 6 years ago, and subsequently they've had sequels to that as well. So Paddington is on my left-hand side. I say the engineer Brunel, so his railway, because across the world the standard width of the rail, standard gauge of the railway is what, 3'6", something like that. Brunel's railway, the rails were about 7 foot wide, much wider, which gave apparently a more smoother ride and more efficient. And of course you could put bigger carriages and carry more passengers. But the other big railway builders of the day were the Stephenson, George and Robert Stephenson, and they were building more railways with the standard gauge of 3'6". So that became the standard. It's a bit like the old Betamax versus VHS video system. Apparently Betamax was a better system, but because VHS was VHS was just more popular. I want to turn left here. There's a few people wearing various sporting tops today. It's a big day for sport. We have got what's called the Six Nations, big rugby tournament between England, Scotland, Wales. The entrance to the Paddington Station is to my left-hand side here. Yeah, so you see a few sports jerseys today. Rugby tournament, England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, France, Italy play something called the Six Nations, big rugby tournament. Just looking where these guys and girls are from with their jerseys. There's also in the soccer, football, there's something called the FA Cup. FA stands for Football Association. It's a knockout tournament where even the smallest semi-professional teams could be playing the likes of Liverpool. So that's a big day for some small clubs. Last night Manchester United were knocked out by a lower division team called Middlesbrough. So big sporting day today, and of course the Winter Olympics have started, but that's obviously not here. Now this is, say, Paddington Station on the left hand side, and occupying a lot of the buildings on my right hand side, this is St Mary's Hospital. And St Mary's Hospital is a National Health Service hospital, our beloved NHS, National Health Service, which was established in 1948. Much loved in this country. It's not perfect, but we love it. You can buy private health insurance if you wish to. and there is a couple of private wings in some of these hospitals. And here at St Mary's is the private Lindo wing. Here on my right hand side is the entrance to the Lindo wing. This is a private. This is private, and this is where Prince William was born, Prince Harry was born, William and Kate's children, all three of them, Louis, George and Charlotte, were born. And so you've probably seen it countless times on the news, with Diana coming out of this door when William and Harry were born, and when William and Kate had all their three children out here. And of course there was just like hundreds of people here on this side of the road waiting, and the world's media waiting, particularly when it came to Princess Charlotte being born. They announced that Kate was pregnant, but they didn't sort of say when she was going to be due. So people worked it out, thought, well, okay, they've announced it in whatever month it was, October, and they said, well, okay, so she's probably about 2 months pregnant already, so she's probably going to be giving birth about end of April, May, something like that. But we had people out here about 3 weeks before the birth. There's one guy, I've forgotten his name, but he's just completely obsessed with the royal family. I mean, I'm sure security services have checked him out, but and not discerned that he's a threat, but he's just obsessed with the royal family. But he was camped out here for 3 weeks, and there was, I think, quite a lot of American news crews out here for 3 weeks. Imagine the news bulletins. We're just in America. We're just going to go over to Cindy in London. What's the latest, Cindy? Nothing. Back to you in the studio. 3 weeks of nothing. Back to you in the studio. But yeah, there's obviously some people completely obsessed with with what goes on with the royal family. So yeah, there's the Lindo wing, which you've seen in all the news reports. The other thing about St Mary's Hospital, so other people that were born here include Elvis Costello. He was born here. The actor Keith Sutherland was born here. An actress you may or may not have heard of called Keely Hawes, she was born here as well. But the other thing about St Mary's Hospital, a little clue up on the building there, hidden behind the tree, says Fleming discovered penicillin. Alexander Fleming, early 20th century, discovers penicillin here, and he thought that looks interesting. Put it on the shelf, and didn't do much with it. It's not until a few years later that some research scientists in Oxford University, led by a man, Australian by birth, a man called Florey, that actually started to develop it into what we now use today, antibiotics. But Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin here at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. So that's Paddington done to death. So the railway, the hospital, and Paddington Bear. Where are you going, sir? What are you doing? What are you doing? What do you want to do? Where are you going? No, I don't know what you're doing. I'm going to go. Let's go this way. No entry to south. What's going on here? Bit weird. It's saying no entry, but it's saying one way. Yes, even during lockdown, so I've had very little work in the last 2 years. Certainly, this is my first job of this year. Nothing. Well, the lockdown was March 2020 was the last tour I did.
Very bad for your job because no tourists coming, and
yeah, because I rely on overseas tourists. I did a couple of tours in 21 for friends. Sorry, are your guests going to be interested in the Beatles?
Yes, sure.
Okay,
sure.
Let's go to Abbey Road and we'll do that.
Beatles is one of the most famous band in
Let's do
UK.
Abbey Road then, and we can do some more famous sites.
Everybody knows John Lennon and history with Yoko and.
Let's do that then, and then we can do Westminster Abbey and all that. Yeah, so I did a couple of tours for friends and colleagues in 21, but only a couple. It was mainly. And then as restrictions were lifted towards the end of last year, so a little peak of work in November, October, November, and then of course Omicron happened in October. So any jobs I had planned for December and January, they were cancelled, and so thank you very much. Is it Sorin or Sorin?
Sorin. Yes. Now after I will publish in YouTube, I am sure you'll have a lot of customers,
Well, I've still got a few hours to mess this up. We're only an hour into this, and I've got plenty of time.
What does mean blue badge, Glenn? Because they told me when I I paid the guide tour, they say you'll have a special guide with blue badge.
Yes, so blue badge is the official guiding qualification. There's nothing to stop anybody being a guide in London. But there is a course you can take, and the qualification is called the blue badge. I say there are, I say anybody could be a guide, but you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if they, I mean, but being a blue badge guide,
which knowledge they have without blue badge,
yeah, you'd have to question other people's knowledge, and I'm sure that, I mean, there might be, I mean, for example, go back to the Beatles. There's a guy called Richard Porter. He's not a blue badge guide, but he's, you know, he knows everything about the Beatles. Just because you know everything about something,
specialized strictly on Beatles. Yeah.
But the blue badge, there are regional blue badges. So there's one for London, there's one similar one for Scotland, for the southeast of England. The London course is 2 years part-time. I did mine 20 years ago. I did my course, and it was 2 classes a week. Classroom was at Imperial College, so I could say I went to Imperial College.
Nice.
We had 3 hours, 2 3-hour lectures, 6 hours of lectures a week, and then every Saturday we were out doing things like, in detail, Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, St Paul's Cathedral, British Museum, all the galleries, although we were examined on one gallery. And then when it came to the exams, there were 4 written papers. Most of those papers were one-word answers, like who's the architect of, you know, St Paul's Cathedral. A couple of essay-type questions as well. But a lot of it is practical stuff. So we were thoroughly examined on one of the galleries. In my case, it was Tate Modern. Then British Museum, say Tower of London's. All of those were done in detail, and also a commentary. So, okay, I'm doing the tour in my car today. I mean, there's over 800 blue badge guides in London. Not everyone is a driver guide, but there's about 60 of us that have used their own cars for doing tours. But part of the course is to do a commentary on a tour bus. So that's thoroughly examined as well, and also a walking tour. We do a little walking tour as well. So that is the blue badge qualification, and I say we have various institutions which we belong to. Institution of Tourist Guide, they're the ones that oversee the qualification, and then there's the Association of Professional Tourist Guide, and also the Guild of Registered Tourist Guides. And so, you know, they regulate the trade, you know, make sure we behave ourselves, make sure we're not
it's very important.
Make sure to upkeep professional standards. There's continual professional development. So just like any other trade association for any trade, there is that. But I say the guides out there that are not qualified blue badge guides, you know, for all I know, they can be fantastic. But at least with the blue badge, you should be assured that you're going to get a good time and a professional guide. And so this part of London, we're back in the city of Westminster again, and we're going to go up to see Abbey Road, which of course was famous by the Beatles. The Beatles were from Liverpool. You probably know that. Liverpool's about, what, 450 kilometres north-west of London, which back in the late 1950s, early 1960s was a different world away from London. The Beatles story in Liverpool is another whole tour in Liverpool about the Beatles, where they grew up, where they were born, etc., how they first started. But as far as London's story is concerned, it starts on January the 1st, 1962, where they came for an audition for a record label called Decca Records. Not too far from here, they turned up for an audition with Decca Records, and the A&R man for Decca Records, a man called Dick, it'll come to me again in a second. He reputedly said to Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, after the Beatles had auditioned, he said, well, quite frankly, Mr. Epstein, we don't like your boys, and besides, guitar bands are on the way out. Anyway, whatever the truth behind that story, the Beatles weren't signed to Decca. However, Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, got the tapes. remember tape, everybody? Got the tapes from this session, went to a place called the HMV store in London where they put the tapes onto acetate. So acetate is just like the phase from the tapes to a final vinyl version of a record. The engineer that's mixing this down at the HMV store liked what he hears. He said, let me introduce you to George Martin at Parlophone. So this is what happened, and in June 1962, so 60 years ago this year, the Beatles came to the EMI studios at Abbey Road, which is where we're heading right now. And the story often quoted, George Martin passed away a few years ago, and the story was repeated many times again. But the story is that George Martin meets the boys, and they say, hello, I'm John, I'm Paul, I'm George. He said, right, what we'll do, lads, is go into the recording room, we'll take a few takes of various songs, and then you can come back into the mixing room, we'll play it back, you can tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. And George Harrison said, well, for a start, I don't like your tie, is what George Harrison said to George Martin. And often quoted, you know, they said, George Martin said, well, yeah, they were okay, they weren't super fantastic, but it was their wit and their charm and their humour that won us over. So they thought, well, if they're like that with us, what are they going to be like out there with the public? So that was in June 62 as their first audition. They came back in September 62. Main lineup change was that the Beatles' first drummer, Pete Best, was now gone. Different stories as to why he left, but Ringo's now the drummer. And George Martin, on meeting in September 62, said, well, who's this? And they said, well, it's Ringo, he's our new drummer. And what George Martin had said at this previous meeting in June, he said, look, I want to put my own session drummer in for them when you come in September. Apparently not uncommon thing to do back in the early 60s. And so poor old Ringo is playing, you know, tambourine and maracas on the first Beatles recording that was released, which was Love Me Do. And then they came back again in the November to do Please Please Me. And when they recorded Please Please Me, they said, congratulations boys, you've got your first #1. So that was end of 62. And then they came back again in the February of 63 to record their first album, which was called Please Please Me, and they did it in one 12-hour session. They were in the middle of a tour, I think it was supporting Roy Orbison, I think it was. But more famously, their last album they recorded here back in summer 69 was Abbey Road. This is Abbey Road. This is the famous crossing here. I don't know if you want to get out and do this, but this is the crossing which features on the album Abbey Road, and the actual studios are here on my left-hand side, which is going through a bit of a trim.
Abbey Road Studios.
There's the Abbey Road Studios. So the studios themselves opened in the 1930s. Sir Edward Elgar officially opened the studios with the, was it the Royal Philharmonic or the London Philharmonic? I'm sorry, I've got cars behind me. Did you want to get out at all?
No, it's okay.
To reenact this certain album cover? We'll go back the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the studios themselves were opened in the 1930s. So Edward Elgar conducted the, I've forgotten if it was the London Philharmonic or the Royal Philharmonic. Anyway, he conducted the orchestra where they did one of Edward Elgar's famous compositions called Pomp and Circumstance, which goes, Land of Hope and Glory. And that was the first. In fact, let me show you a couple of pictures of what it looks like inside the studios. Just say traffic can be a nightmare and parking even worse. But let me show you a few photographs. And where shall I pull over? Yeah, so you know where to park. Of course, when all these houses were built, no such thing as the motor car, so no such thing as garages. So and to park here, you have to have a parking permit. If you look in the windshield of all these cars,
everybody have park permit,
parking permits. Right, let's see how I can. Nothing behind me. Let me quickly pull up these pictures. Yeah, so the Beatles recorded. Also, Glenn Miller, band leader, famous band leader. His last recordings were here. Yehudi Menuhin, famous violinist, he recorded here. and the Beatles recorded almost everything here. What was to be released as Let It Be was recorded elsewhere. Some of the White Album was recorded elsewhere also. And where's my pictures of Abbey Road Studios? Yes, so there's 3 main studios there. That's Studio 1. That's the opening of Sir Edward Elgar's. That's Studio 2, where the Beatles recorded most of their music. And an Abbey Road album cover. August '69, the album cover was taken. They were going to call it Everest because Jeff Emmerich, the engineer, smoked Everest cigarettes. They thought probably a bit expensive to go over to Mount Everest, so they decided to take pictures outside the studios, crossing the famous crossing here. 6 photographs were taken. Paul chose which one they should have on the album cover, and I've got to go. I've got a car behind me, and the album cover sparked all sorts of rumours about Paul being dead. Paul is barefoot. I mean, and there was a review of the album in some student magazine in the United States, and somebody had commented that Paul being barefoot was a mafia sign of death. Apparently it isn't, but it was just all these rumours and stories being created, and but it's turned in a whole industry of rumours about Paul being dead. So, for example, what else? What he's saying is the album cover represents a funeral scene with John being the parson, Ringo being the grave digger, Paul being the corpse, and George being I've forgotten what it was now. But of course it was all nonsense about Paul being dead. Why they choose this one, why Paul chose this one, basically is it was not meant to be, but it just so happened as they're walking across the road they're all in step, and that's probably one of the reasons why they chose that picture rather than the others. This, you can see a lot of traffic in the background with this one and the bus coming here. But that was the last album they recorded. There is so the studios aren't open to the public. It still is a working studio, mainly classical music they record here. A lot of movie scores as well. So, you know, the whole Harry Potter movie scores were recorded here. And I think they also record music for computer games, things like that also here. So it still is a working studios. Officially opened as the EMI Studios. Wasn't really known as Abbey Road Studios until a certain album of 1970 was released. There is now a small gift shop, which looks like it's closed today while they're doing some tree maintenance. But they did have, I'm not sure how frequently they're going to do it, but a couple of years ago I did attend a lecture here. There was an engineer that worked here, his name eludes me, but they did a little history of recording of the studios here. That's about the only chance you're going to get to visit the studios. And of course lots of people try to cross here, get their photographs done. Bad things about London is woefully inadequate bathroom facilities in London. Woefully inadequate. So for all the visitors out there in the cyber world, a lot of cafes, you know, just ask them nicely, can I borrow your bathroom? They will oblige.
To take something.
Not necessarily. I personally, I mean, some people are good. They just sort of say, yeah, go ahead. Particularly in the city of London, the business district, there's actually a little scheme going where you can just go in and there's like a little sticker in the window saying, yeah, you can use our toilets for free. If it's a pub or whatever, McDonald's, I just go and use McDonald's because I think I've spent enough money at McDonald's in the past to justify using their bathrooms. Quickly show you where Paul McCartney lives. Who knows? We might be lucky to see him. I doubt it, but let's see what happens. So yeah, Paul McCartney. I'll show you a few other passing.
Still live here, huh?
Still lives here. He bought the house about 67, I think it was. And the Beatles, so they were from Liverpool. When they moved to, well, they had to move to London because this is where all the recording was, studios were, all the promotions, etc. had to be. So Paul, first of all, when there was one time when the Beatles all lived together in late '63. John was already married to Cynthia. And this is Paul McCartney's house on my left-hand side, on my right-hand side here, sorry, with the big brown doors. They all lived together in late '63. John was already married to Cynthia, and they'd already had Julian, so they lived in a house.
Not so big. I was expecting to be something huge villa, you know.
Yeah.
It's a modest house.
Yeah, also looks like something up in the tree there. But then Paul had met a girl called Jane Asher, and Paul lodged with the Asher family not too far away. I think it was in 66, 67 he bought this place. I think it was £40,000 he bought it for. Spent another £20,000 on decorating it to his tastes. But now it's probably worth about 8 million. The houses around here probably worth, you know, around about 4, 5, 6 million. Although, because it's Paul McCartney's house, it's probably worth about 8 million. So, yeah, this is where he lives.
Quiet area.
In fact, there's, I mean, he lives, obviously he'll have other places around the world, but when he got married, I'll get a chance to show you where he got married, but when he got married to Linda, he was living here when he got married to Linda, so they had the reception at the Ritz Hotel. After the wedding, they came back here for a quick press meeting, and then they went to the Ritz Hotel. He then got married to her whose name must not be mentioned and then he married Nancy Chevelle, and this is where they came back here for their party after the wedding, wherever that clip is. Where's it gone? See, I have so many. Oh, is that it? No, that's. Oh yeah. That's that one.
Afterwards, the couple posed briefly outside their London home. Sir Paul said it had been a wonderful, terrific day. I feel married, he said. Andy Moore, BBC News.
That's the house there. That was on a Sunday he got married, and then of course he had what was his name, DJ, forgot his name, but anyway the DJ came that Sunday night to spin the records, and of course the party went on till the early hours of Monday morning in this nice residential area, and of course the local authority were called about the noise complaints. Not the first time that Paul McCartney's been involved with noise complaints. In fact, the only time I've seen him, although I drive down here quite a lot, I've seen him once. That was back in 2012, I think it was, 2013. And I was with some guests who had flown over from the US to see Bruce Springsteen playing at Hyde Park. And at that Hyde Park concert, McCartney turned up for the encore, and he did Twist and Shout and saw us standing there. But they pulled the plug on them because they'd gone over the curfew time. That was the second time he's been told off about noise. I'll talk about it the third time later on.